Some people think that the height of human evil is corruption in public office. Others say it's war or corporate greed. But anyone who's ever had an HOA on their tail knows that there's an even lower level, that of the neighbor turned environmental sheriff, who believes they know more than a forestry engineer, biologist, agronomist, and, in this case, even the director of the State Environment Agency. Yes, that was me. And it all started because I planted a tree, a native tree, a tree that, ironically, is on the list of recommendations for urban reforestation of the very agency I head. But in that woman's mind, I had committed a crime against the neighborhood, against the delicate eyes of the other residents, and, according to her, against good landscaping practices. A phrase so ridiculous that it could only have come from the mouths of people who print their own authority slips at home. The tree in question was a Peroba rosa, a symbol of local biodiversity, hardy, beautiful, and generously shaded. I had planted it in the corner of the front yard, well away from the sidewalk, with no risk to anyone. No root invading the pipe, no branch hitting the neighbor's roof. Nothing. Just a tree. But the appearance of that red-haired creature, wearing sunglasses even when the sky was overcast, pointing his finger and waving a plastic briefcase, already signaled that the piece was over. She didn't come alone. She was accompanied by a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a B-movie detective. A shabby dress shirt, a badge dangling from his neck, and a clipboard with sheets printed in such poor quality that you could see the Google Images watermark on the back. He introduced himself as Environmental Inspector for the Control of Integrated Urban Afforestation, a name as pompous as it was false. He tried to speak with authority. He said he had received a formal complaint from the HOA about a tree element with a negative impact that was outside the visual standard approved by the Neighborhood Landscape Committee. I swear, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. I looked at the guy, who couldn't even hold a tape measure properly, and asked, "Do you know the scientific name of this tree?" He widened his eyes. He stuttered. He looked at the woman next to him with the triumphant smile of someone who thought they had won the battle of the century against the Green Terror. The inspector's response was an embarrassed, "I think it's pink anything?" It was at that moment that I realized that this wasn't just an abuse of power. It was theater, cheap theater, rehearsed by people who have never really understood their own smallness. And since all theater needs an audience, the most absurd thing was yet to come. The HOA, instead of calling me to talk like any civilized adult would, tried to intimidate me with a pseudo-tax operation. And best of all, with a made-up inspector. They made a fake stamp, created a supposed inspection order, printed out a form with a generic Department of Local Preservation logo, which, just for the record, doesn't even exist, and stuck it on my gate along with a fine notice. Fine. For planting a tree that was protected, recommended, and encouraged by government programs. It was like being fined for wearing a seatbelt. I took photos of everything. I scanned every document. I took fingerprints off the paper, just for fun. And I left the tree there, beautiful, growing as if nothing was happening, as if it wasn't the target of a personal crusade against everything green and natural. Because, in the end, that was it. The woman hated anything that she didn't approve of. A cactus was already a threat to the social order. A lawn with 2 colors? A war crime? Over the next few days, I noticed that the patrol increased. Random walks in front of my house, whispers from neighbors, some curious, others complicit. The HOA posted a notice in the neighborhood group saying that new tree planting rules were being studied and that all residents should wait for guidelines before planting any type of vegetation. It was pathetic. They were trying to legalize madness, but they forgot one small detail. Any community regulation that violates state and federal environmental guidelines is null and void. And the person who writes those guidelines, reviews them, approves them, and publishes them is me, the director of the agency. the person who literally signs the regulation that this woman was trying to use against me. That's when I decided to play around a bit. Instead of confronting, I decided to document everything. I gathered evidence of the fake inspector. I recorded the approach. I asked my team to investigate whether his name was in any database. Of course it wasn't, not even as a trainee. He was a complete stranger, or worse, an orange. I sent everything to a prosecutor friend. He laughed so hard that he had to hang up the phone to get himself together. But he assured me this was going to become a formal investigation. Ideological falsehood, use of a false document, attempted coercion based on non-existent authority. The list was long, delicious, and perfectly reasoned. The woman had no idea what she had started. While she was organizing meetings on acceptable landscaping standards and preparing pamphlets on hostile vegetation, I was organizing a formal lawsuit, an audit of the HOA's bylaws, and a report with more than 80 pages detailing the illegal actions of that little plastic rain. And all because of a tree. And she thought she was winning. The problem with certain people isn't just arrogance, it's the blind conviction that their ignorance is equivalent to technical knowledge. This woman was exactly like that. It wasn't enough that she didn't understand anything about the environment, urban legislation, biodiversity. She thought she had a moral obligation to correct the world based on her own outbursts. And now she had invented a whole department of inspection just to try and shut me up. The queen of the homemade stamp. After the pathetic scene with the fake inspector and the fake notice, I thought she would at least pretend to be sorry, disappear for a few weeks, take a break. But no. The next day, a pile of leaflets appeared on the doorstep of every house in the block. A visual guide to appropriate landscaping for organized neighborhoods, a more pompous than useful title, printed on thick paper with a clip art of a smiling tree on the cover. I had to laugh. Inside the guide, it listed which types of plants could be grown in the community gardens. It mentioned trees with a low visual threat, flowers with a soft color palette, and vegetation that respects the geographical harmony of the surroundings. Seriously, it looked like I'd copied an interior design thesis and adapted it for my backyard. The last straw was when they put up a section with photos. Acceptable versus unacceptable. Guess who appeared in the wrong category? Yes, my Peroba rosa, with a red arrow pointing to it, and the caption, "Example of aggressive and reckless choice." Not only did she want to dictate what everyone could plant, she wanted to educate the neighborhood based on ridiculously unofficial material. It was like a botanical oppression manual. I began to understand that this had crossed the line into authoritarianism. It was obsession, pathological. The woman didn't sleep at night thinking about how to standardize leaves, stems, and shadows. The funny thing was that she still thought it would all go unpunished, that people would swallow any more of this crazy stuff that looked like the norm. But she hadn't counted on the fact that I had just officially filed a complaint against the HOA with the Environmental Prosecutor's Office. I detailed all the actions of the president, attached copies of the leaflets, the false notification, and the images of the inspector. I even included the PDF of the ridiculous guide. The prosecutor said that in his 20-year career, he had never laughed so much reading a complaint. Meanwhile, I began to receive anonymous messages from residents. Some were afraid to identify themselves. Others were relieved to finally see someone standing up to that tyrant in khaki pants. One said he had to uproot a jaboticaba tree because he claimed it didn't fit in with the European spirit of the neighborhood. Another said he'd received a warning for planting sunflowers. Sunflowers. Because, according to her, very vibrant colors cause visual confusion in children. This woman was a public health problem. At the same time, I went to the legal department of my own agency and asked for a technical opinion on the tree I had planted. The guys laughed, of course, but they did everything right. A document signed by a forestry engineer, a biologist, and an urban geographer, all attesting that the tree was not only legal, but recommended by the city's guidelines. A great lesson in how to do things when you have a brain. Something that the owner of the HOA clearly didn't have even as decoration. With the opinion in hand, I wrote a polite and sarcastic letter, just the way I like it. It began, "Dear Madam, I would like to reassure you about the danger of the tree on my sidewalk. Despite the threatening appearance of its green leaves and immovable branches, it has no history of attacks on neighbors or terrorist tendencies. It is even listed as a symbol of reforestation in 3 municipal programs that you probably don't know about." At the end, I attached the technical opinion and recommended that she kindly update her private library of environmental delusions. I posted it in the community group with a copy of the letter and the documents. In less than an hour, the post already had more likes than any HOA ad in the last 5 years. Reactions ranged from laughter to indignation to relief. It was as if a collective snap had occurred. People realized that they were being ruled by a lunatic with access to a laser printer. Her response was even more pathetic. She sent another pamphlet, this time with the title, "Environmental Counterattack, Defending Our Neighborhood from Hostile Trees and Extremist Reactions." She tried to paint the situation as if I were an ecological terrorist, infiltrated to implant an anarchic jungle in the middle of the neighborhood's visual organization. Now she had declared war. Only, in this war, she had no idea who had provoked it. Because while she was dropping leaflets, I was carrying out investigations. While she was sticking paper in letterboxes, I was building a dossier with technical, legal, and institutional backing. And everything, absolutely everything, was soon going to blow up in her face. She was about to discover that the environment is much more dangerous when you decide to fight with those who really care for it. Things got out of hand on a Wednesday afternoon when an environmental police vehicle, a real one with a coat of arms on the hood and a uniformed officer, parked right at the entrance to the condominium. The scene was cinematic. While residents were returning from work or picking up their children from school, the car stood out among the SUVs with sunroofs and electric bikes, like a wolf among lambs. The agent got out with a black briefcase in his hands and the firm step of someone who knew exactly what he was going to do. He walked straight into the headquarters of the HOA, or rather into the makeshift garage of the presidency, where the woman ran her little empire of posters and staplers. He entered without knocking. Inside were her, 2 members of the board, and the same guy who had once pretended to be an environmental inspector, now dressed as if he were an employee of a building materials store. The mask fell off before anyone said anything. The agent didn't put on a show, didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize. He just presented the documents, an order to seize HOA files, cell phones, computers, and financial records. The complaint of ideological falsehood, use of false documents, and attempted coercion against a public servant had become a formal action. And by public servant, I meant the director of the State Environment Agency, the man she thought she could intimidate with sulfite paper and a tree sticker. While this was going on inside the garage, outside the neighbors were gathering, disguising their interest with slow walks, forced dog walks, and small talk about the weather. Some looked at each other with complicity, others just watched quietly, but most had the same thought on their faces. It took a while, but it's here. It was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Not that the neighborhood was rebellious or unruly, on the contrary. They were peaceful, hard-working people, but they had spent too long living under a regime of landscape paranoia. The next morning, a notice was pasted on the wall of the main square. The activities of the current HOA board are suspended indefinitely. An extraordinary committee will be formed to manage community affairs during the investigation period. No name, no signature, no spotlight. A silent, clean, and surgical blow, exactly as it should be. In my institutional email, I received a preliminary report with the task force's initial findings. Among them were documents signed by her on behalf of non-existent public bodies, forged stamps with distorted logos, suspicious financial transactions involving gardening companies that provided no services at all, and payments approved by her for ecological consultancies that simply never existed. It was as if she had created an entire system just to feed her own ego and maintain the illusion that she controlled everything and everyone around her. But what struck me most was the section dedicated to manipulating residents. There it was documented that she held private meetings with some residents, especially the elderly, convincing them that there was a federal law that obliged all backyards to follow a visual harmonic pattern, a law that, of course, only she knew about. Some of the stories were heartbreaking. People uprooting fruit trees planted decades ago, gardens destroyed for fear of invented punishments, families coerced into painting their houses neutral colors under threat of fines. The impact was real. The damage was profound. As I read, I felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at having let this farce go on for so long, and relief that it was finally falling apart. But there was also a touch of sadness. Sadness at how far a person can go when they believe that power is more important than respect. And when that power is placed in the wrong hands, it becomes poison. The icing on the cake came one rainy morning. I was tending to my garden, now free of threats and acceptable lists, when she appeared. Without the flowery blazer, without the clipboard, without the arrogant walk of before. She was soaking wet, her hair stuck to her forehead, her eyes lost. She no longer looked like the woman who tried to humiliate me with fake stamps. She was just a neighbor who didn't know where to hide. She stopped on the other side of the fence, hesitated, and then said, "I didn't know you were important." I remained silent. There was nothing more to say. She knew. The neighborhood knew. And justice, more than ever, knew. The rain thickened, and she turned away without waiting for an answer. She walked down the sidewalk with short steps, like someone carrying a weight that not even her soul can bear. And I stayed there, planting. Because while she was digging her own hole, I was planting roots. 2 weeks after the parade of the environmental police vehicle, the neighborhood seemed like a different place. The silence was different, lighter. The HOA meetings had been suspended. The woman had disappeared from the map, and even the board members themselves were pretending that they had never been involved in anything. It was like watching a ship sink in slow motion, while the rats threw themselves into the water one by one, each swearing they couldn't even swim. The new provisional committee was formed with more sensible neighbors, people who understood that living in a community didn't mean watching each other's yards with binoculars. The first decisions were simple: annulment of the fines that had been wrongly imposed, withdrawal of the former president's educational pamphlets, and an open letter, signed by all the members of the committee, apologizing to the residents for the behavior of the old board. The letter didn't mention any names, but it didn't need to. Everyone knew who they were talking about. Meanwhile, the process went on behind the scenes with almost surgical precision. The woman was summoned to testify, and so was the fake tax man. The prosecution gathered an arsenal of evidence so robust that even a lawyer from a Mexican soap opera would have given up defending it. The most absurd thing? They discovered that the badge worn by the fake inspector had been made from a photo taken from LinkedIn and printed on an inkjet printer. The level of amateurism was embarrassing. The icing on the cake was a leaked audio in which she instructed one of the inspectors to speak with confidence and not let the resident interrupt with technical questions. The whole city turned its eyes to the case. The local press picked up the story as an exemplary community scandal. Headlines like "HOA President Invents Environmental Inspection and Gets into Trouble with Environmental Director" began to circulate. In one of them, I was called "the man who brought down the dictatorship of landscaping." It was one of the few times that local journalism has managed to be both accurate and poetic. One of the following afternoons, I received a letterhead from the prosecutor's office. The woman was being formally charged with ideological falsehood, coercion of a public servant, use of false documents, and misappropriation of HOA funds. The penalty? A hefty fine, permanent loss of office, and, depending on the court decision, even community service. Just imagine, she, who used to fine people for having crooked flower pots, cleaning up public squares and painting curbs. Curiously, I never saw the woman walking around the neighborhood after that. Some say she moved away. Others swear she still lives there, but never leaves the house. The truth is that it doesn't matter. She lost what she cherished most, the stage. Without the clipboards, without the bulletins, without the colorful flyers, there's nothing left. Just her name, echoing in conversations that have become jokes. What she hated so much is now beautiful. It has grown strong, with ample shade, branches that dance with the wind without asking permission. The neighbors now even compliment it. A lady told me the other day that she had planted one just like it in her yard, inspired by mine. The irony of this is a gift. That tree became a symbol of resistance, of freedom, and of a neighborhood that decided it was no longer going to kowtow to madness disguised as organization. I continued my work at the agency, but with a slightly wider smile, greater patience, and a renewed certainty that sometimes justice not only works, but is also delicious to watch. I didn't have to shout, lose my temper, or stoop to anyone's level. It was enough to let the facts, like roots, find the right soil and grow on their own. If there's one thing this story has proved, it's that some people try to control the world with a sheet of paper and a stapler, but they forget that nature, when it wants to, will even grow through asphalt. And sometimes it grows in the form of a tree in the backyard of someone who knows very well how to protect it. And if you like this video, don't forget to leave a comment and a like.